She is a PhD student at the Georgia Institute of Technology in the School of Physics. She's studying active matter and nonlinear dynamics or biophysical systems. It's a bit in this field, she's mainly biophysics, and she's coordinated a very important effort on mental health for graduate students. And in fact, she has written It's Time for Physicists to Talk About Mental Health in Physics Today, which was published in May this year, right? And it was one of the most articles read during the year. And she is also now creating and working to create a resource about mental health services across various colleges and campuses for students. So anything that you can. So she is just a PhD student, as many of you. So in your case, you can ask whatever you want.
Yes. First, I'd like to thank the organizers for having me and thank Emmy for her great talk before this. I apologize, I'm a little sick right now, so if my voice isn't clear, just tell me to speak louder. But so as mentioned, my name is Andrea Welsh. I'm a PhD candidate at Georgia Tech. I just wanted to give you a little information about myself so you know where I'm coming from. So I'm a physicist. I'm in my 6th year. Hopefully I'll be done by next summer. As mentioned, I recently wrote an article called It's Time for Physicists to Talk About Mental Health. I've done a lot of activities with regards to women in physics and diversity in physics. I was the American Physical Society Forum of Graduate Student Affairs member at large, and that's kind of part of what got this discussion about mental health rolling for me. As part of that position, we organized a session at the APS March meeting in 2017 about dealing with mental health as a graduate student. And from the attendance of that session and people who spoke to me afterwards, we realized that it was a much bigger issue than what we thought. But also, I wanted to bring up, outside of physics, I have a husband that I recently got married. He's also a physicist. So we're going to have to deal with the two-body problem at some point. And I have a lot of other hobbies that I try to take part in every once in a while just to keep myself sane. But I've been dealing with depression, anxiety, PTSD, and other things throughout my years. So basically, since I was in high school, I've had depression, but it got a lot worse in graduate school, and especially my first year of graduate school in the US, which was very course-heavy, with also teaching requirements and learning how to start research. I ended up being pretty suicidal at that point, which is when I started really seeking different sorts of healthcare. So some of the stuff I'm going to be talking about, you're going to hear repeated from the previous talk. I'll try to go through it a little bit quickly so it's not, just hitting you over the head with the same information. But first I want to say, when we talk about what mental health is, what we're talking about is your emotional, psychological, and social well-being, your ability to cope with stress, your ability to be productive at your job or in your daily life, your ability to make any sort of meaningful contributions to one's community, and the ability to meet one's potential. And then just to talk about what poor mental health looks like, just to hit on a few things. This could be eating or sleeping too much or too little, so some sort of change in your diet or sleep patterns. Pulling away from people and usual activities. It's hard to know what that looks like, I think, in academia, when a lot of times we don't have a lot of social activities, but a lot less than usual. Having low or no energy, feeling like nothing matters. I think in the last talk we heard feeling useless, so that's something pretty similar. But there's also some physical aspect to it, so unexpected aches and pains. You could have headaches or shaking, or you can even have hot flashes, as was mentioned. And a lot of these things can affect your ability to perform your daily tasks in work and in your social life. So you might have heard a bunch of different sort of mental health issues, such we talked about depression and anxiety, bipolar disorder. I mentioned PTSD earlier, which is post-traumatic stress disorder. But one thing I want to point out is that you don't need to be diagnosed with an illness to have poor mental health. So I know one problem that has come up when I talk to students, they don't want to seek counseling because they say, oh, I'm not depressed, counseling's not for me. Or, I am not suicidal, so I don't need to go see a doctor about this. And I think that becomes a big problem because going to see counseling or trying to fix your mental health doesn't mean you have a very large problem, and you don't need to self-select yourself out of these services. I think it's important for everybody, if you notice that there is a problem, to go seek some sort of help. And it doesn't mean necessarily that you have one of these, but it could be, and that's okay too. So this is just some statistics I wanted to throw out there from the National Alliance on Mental Illness. This is from the US. So for 12 months prevalence of major depressive episode among adults in the US, one thing I wanted to point out was that it's much higher in the 18 to 25 and like 26 to 40 age group than older, and I think we're looking at that age group when we're talking about students. And similar for any sort of mental illness. You also see this difference in gender where you have women more likely to be experiencing some sort of mental health issues than men, and that was also brought up in the previous talk. So this is also from another study that was mentioned earlier, and I wanted to really highlight what the symptoms they looked for in this study. So basically, they surveyed 3,700 PhD students in Belgium and had them, say how much they agreed with each one, and then using that statistics, decided who classified as having major depression or major anxiety disorder. So they didn't just ask, do you have depression? And people said yes or no. They tried to figure out who would be classified as having these things. So if you look at these, I think a lot of you have probably experienced some of these symptoms: feeling under constant strain, unhappy and depressed, loss of sleep over worry, lost confidence in self, feeling worthless and cannot make decisions. And depending on the group, somewhere between having 2 or 4 of these symptoms classifies as having major depression. So you're probably sitting there and some of you are thinking, I can relate to some of those. I know I can relate to a lot of them most of the time. So I just wanted to point out that it's a little bit more common than you might think. From another study that was mentioned earlier, I think here what I want to highlight, so 41% of graduate students scored as having moderate to severe anxiety compared to 6% of the general population, so that's quite a bit different. 39% of graduate students scored as having moderate to severe depression as compared to 6% of the general population. And I think one of the things I wanted to point out here is the relationship with the advisor, which was talked a little bit about before, but we're going to go into a little bit more detail. So this is how well the students agreed or disagreed with how supportive their advisor was. So whether the advisor provided mentorship, provided ample support, provided a positive emotional impact, access to career, and how they felt valued by their mentor. And one thing the study shows is a correlation between how the students, whether they agreed or disagreed with this, and whether they were classified as having anxiety or having depression. So you can look at some of the more specific studies in this paper, which is mentioned at the end and was also mentioned in the previous talk. But basically what you can see is that there seems to be some correlation with how you perceive your relationship with your advisor and how your mental health is in graduate school. And again, we start seeing this sort of breakdown between gender. So this study here not only has men and women, but also talks about transgender or gender non-conforming students, For those of you that don't know, a transgender person is somebody who identifies as a different gender than what they were born at. So you could be a transgender woman, so maybe you were born assigned as a male, and at some point in your life you found that female was your preferred identity. So it gets a bit more complicated than the statistics when we start talking about some of these subgroups, but I just wanted to point that out there as well. So why is it so high in academia? So some of this comes from talking with other students, some of this comes from the papers. A few things that I found that seem to be very common are the poor work-life balance. So a lot of students work long hours, full days every single day of the week with very few breaks. They have little time for social activities. Family management can be very difficult, as mentioned before. Depending on the country, you could be very far away from your family. As I mentioned before, the two-body problem. So I know that is a particular concern of mine of where my husband and I can get positions and what are we going to do if we cannot get a position in the same place. It's hard enough sometimes to find one position in academia, let alone two. So that comes up a lot too. Also, funding can be a big issue. So there's this idea of publish or perish that you might have heard of. You have to keep publishing papers or else you're just going to be kicked out of academia. For people that are towards the later part of their career, they end up spending a lot more time writing grants and not doing as much science, which is why we, ended up getting our PhD in some sort of STEM field or becoming a professor, is we wanted to do science. So we're not kind of doing the thing that we signed up to do in the first place. Also, we have a lot more PhD students now than awards that are available or positions that are available. And they're not growing at the same rate, which this is from another Nature article from 2016. You can see just the growth rate of PhDs, but number of jobs are remaining the same, so that adds another level of stress. So as mentioned before, the PI-student relationship. So one thing I've talked about with some faculty is that when they became faculty, they never got any sort of training of how to manage a lab, how to manage students or anything like that. So that skill set might not be there for them. And they're learning as they're going, and some people are able to pick it up and some people are not. But unfortunately, that sort of stress ends up getting passed on to the students as well, who then don't know what to do when their advisory also doesn't know how to handle these students. So as mentioned before, students don't feel valued. Lack of clear expectations, so what is defined as success? It's different field to field, number of papers, how many hours a day that you're working, your results. You could be putting a lot of effort in and not seeing a lot of progress. So these are kind of stresses that you're not sure with your advisor, are you being successful or not? And there's not a clear expectation there for you. So as mentioned before, with the jobs, but also some people will get PhDs and look for jobs outside of academia, and unfortunately, with the mentors and advisors that we have, most of them have only been on an academic path, and they don't know how to mentor their student to get a job that is not in academia. So that sort of direction is just not there. How to prepare for interviews, how to even make those connections, it's not there. And I think this was an interesting quote from somebody I talked to with what was one of their main concerns in academia, which is never knowing if you're doing enough, fast enough. It's so individual that you can't compare your work progress to others, or at least you shouldn't. So I think a lot of us try to compare to each other how we're doing just to gauge how successful we're being, but we're all in different fields, we're all in different working groups, we have different projects, and it's really hard to gauge how our progress is. So this is an example from a student in physics that's posted with permission. I'm just going to read this. This is an email from an advisor. It says, I need to keep track of your progress. You are to be in your office from 9 a.m. to 8 p.m. unless you have lectures or teaching, irrespective of your health, mood, or state. Your past does not concern our work. I would like you to discontinue the therapy/psychiatry treatments you are undergoing. You must condition yourself to believe that work is the best therapy. So while this is a very extreme case, I think it is not unheard of, and I think there are advisors who think work is the best medicine, keep your private life and your work life separate, and you will just get through it. Of course, we know that's not the case. Here's another one from an article that I have at the end, which I thought was pretty interesting. The article is also here. We have received some questions about how many hours a graduate student is expected to work. There's no easy answer, as what matters is your productivity, particularly in the form of good scientific papers. However, if you informally canvass the faculty, those people for whose jobs you came here to train, most will tell you that they worked 80 to 100 hours a week in graduate school. No one told us to work those hours, but we enjoyed what we were doing enough to want to do so. We were almost always at the office, including at night and on weekends. So I think one of the issues comes up is that a lot of faculty may say, well, this is what I do, so this is what works. And obviously that is not true for every student or every person in academia. And when you hear that sort of thing from the person who's mentoring you, from the person who you want to show that you're successful for, you try to mimic that same behavior and say, okay, well, I guess that means 80 to 100 hours a week is what I need to do, even if they're not explicitly telling you to do so. And basically the same idea is that we enjoy what we're doing, so we're just putting everything into it and nothing else is needed. And I think that's a pretty ridiculous idea when we all come from different backgrounds, different lives, and we have other things that we want to do. So now, what can we do to help students? So I think one important thing, and I'm really happy to be here, is to talk about it. So I know at Georgia Tech, our graduate advisor talked to our first year, our incoming class of graduate students about mental health and just talked to them about the resources on campus, and I think that's really important. That didn't happen when I was a first year graduate student, so that's a relatively new thing. And I think that's important because it shows that there are people in your department that do care and are aware of these situations. And if you are a student that is going through something, there's someone there for you to talk to. So again, make resources, especially those on campus, easily available to students. So in the US, it depends campus to campus what sort of resources that you have. I'll talk about that a little bit later. But if for students that are usually moving from school to school, they're there pretty temporarily, it might be hard to find those resources. So for faculty that are working there more long term, if they already have a list of here are resources that are local that are available to you, then I think that could be pretty helpful for the students. So have departments hold workshops through campus counseling centers. So I don't know exactly which schools can do this and which can't at the moment, but I know there are some universities at Georgia Tech where you can invite someone from the counseling center, kind of like we did today, to come speak about either the resources or just how to deal with different sorts of stresses, how to deal with things like perfectionism, and that could be for the students, that could also be for faculty, because we know faculty may also be dealing with their own stress, of course. But that kind of goes into my next one, which is training faculty. So I don't know how common it is in Spain or other parts of Europe, but in the United States, we have something called safe space training, which is a training for faculty and some students about LGBT identities. So you're aware of certain sort of terminology, you're aware of resources and things like that. And usually it's run through a certain center, and it's like a one-day class that's a few hours. And then you may not be like perfect and an expert in that area, but if you have a student that comes to you that has an LGBT identity and has an issue, you at least know some basic resources or some basic terms, and you can direct them to the right place to go to get more help. So I think something like that for mental health would be great for faculty as well. So that's more long-term of just trying to come up with some sort of course like that, but I think that could be something really useful. Address it in syllabi or as an instructor or TA. So usually you hand out a syllabus at the beginning of class of just, what comes up, what are missing classes like, health concerns. If you throw a statement in there about mental health and just being available to talk about an issue, you don't need to be counseling the students. I don't think anybody's asking you to do that, but just to say that I am open to this possibility. If you have a concern, we can at least talk about it, because as mentioned before, there's a large stigma, and I think one of the things that are a big issue for students is, can I bring this up? Am I going to be taken seriously? Are they going to really value it as a problem or not? So having that in there can say, okay, well, at least this person knows that this is a problem that exists, and if I have some issue during this class, I can talk to them. So then kind of starting to think a little bit about what to do for research advisors. I kind of left it open here because I'm still thinking myself, but I think a main thing is making the goals clear, making maybe a timeline clear that you can readjust as things go on. I know me and my advisor are still trying to work out what works. He's been very hands-off with his mentoring of myself and some of the other graduate students, but after time with my depression acting on me and very little progress, one thing I had told him was, say, can we have a check-in once a week, come up with a plan, and reassess, next week to see how that plan worked out. And that's been really helping me. Now, some students might not need something like that, but there are students that, to progress, might. And I know if I don't have those check-ins at least once a week, a lot of time could go by without me making any sort of progress, because either I feel like I just need to keep working and then I'll figure it out soon, or I feel like I don't want to ask my advisor for help because I should be able to figure it out. But having some schedule like that, I think, helps a lot of students that are in this area where they don't know what to do next. So unfortunately, mental health doesn't have an easy fix. So as mentioned before, it affects, it's not just in your mind. Even though we're talking about mental health, it affects lots of different areas, which can then affect how you're working. A lot of times people will say just exercise or just eat right and that shall fix all your problems, but that's not always true. I know another concern that comes up is that people will say, I tried talking to a therapist and it didn't work, but sometimes counselors may not be a good fit. I'm sure we've all had to deal with a particular teacher that was not very good, but we've had teachers that are good. But we don't discount all the rest of the teachers just because we had one that was, not great at teaching us. And I think that's the same thing with counseling. So some people, I think, worry about having to take medication. Just because you're seeking counseling doesn't mean you have to take medication. Just because you try one medication and it doesn't work doesn't mean that others won't help you. So I have been on medication for about 6 years now, and it's been 3 different medications that have helped at different points in my life. Some of them really helped with my mood, some of them really helped more with my energy, but then there were points where we had to change just because the side effects were outweighing the benefits. So one in particular, the last one I was on, I think made me gain 50 pounds in 1 year, and that was too much for me, so we switched to a new one, and that's been a bit more stable for me. So I think one thing that's also very important is to remind yourselves, and advisors remind themselves, that failure can still happen even when you're taking care of everything. And that's true for mental health, but that's true for also work. You can work really hard on a grant or a paper and you can still fail. And I think coming from the background, a lot of us were probably, top of our class, perfectionists, and then we go into this field where we're not getting everything right all the time. It's harder, it's, it doesn't work out. And you have to accept that failure is just part of that. And if you came from a place where you weren't failing before, it can be a big shock to you and you can really internalize it. So that's why I like these 2 little comics, which is, you can work super hard and give everything you have and still lose. Or from Jean-Luc Picard, it is possible to commit no mistakes and still lose. It's not a weakness, that is life. So I think kind of reminding yourself that you're not going to get everything right in academia. That's what we're there for. That's part of what research is finding out what is right, and that also means finding out what is wrong. But when it comes with mental health, you could be taking care of yourself and still not have a good mood. You could be exercising and eating right. And I know that sometimes people will say, I'm doing all these things right, how come it's still not working? It's just a matter of finding something else that works, or maybe it's just a different time thing. So you should know what your limits are, but try not to limit yourself, and maybe that means switching a class from pass-fail, or withdrawing from a class. I know some students who have had medical leave for a semester just because their mental health was particularly bad, and that's a much better outcome than just completely failing out and giving up, and just because you were too overstressed. I know, well, this is probably not true here, but in the US, we don't have the master's first and then PhD, so people go straight into the PhD, and that can be a big change. So for them taking a master's program first and then going into PhD. So here's also a little cartoon that I like, that you can still be making your way up. You can still be making, whether with work or with mental health, you can still be making progress, but sometimes you might be in a little dip, and that doesn't discount your overall progress. But sometimes it's hard to see that when we are in that little low. And I think especially if you have depression or anxiety, it might be hard to see that, hey, I came up so far, but now I'm just stuck, but I'll continue going at some point. So now I want to talk a little bit about some resources. Some were mentioned before, but there's, at least in the US, a lot of universities will have individual counseling or group counseling. So I've done a mix of both. So the problem with a lot of individual counseling is there's usually a max number of sessions that you can have, either a year or your entire time at a university. For Georgia Tech, it used to be 16 sessions a year, so our semester is about 15 weeks, so that's once a week, so it's a pretty regular thing. Recently, because we've had a spike in the number of students trying to access these resources, they changed it to 16 your entire time at Georgia Tech, which, as a 6-year graduate student that had been seeking mental health services the entire time, that meant I could no longer use those services. There's some issues there, but they're working on it. There's group counseling, which I think is a little intimidating for a lot of people. I know at first I was thinking, I don't want to talk about my issues with people, and I guess now I'm up here talking about my issues with all of you, but at that time I thought, that's not for me, but it actually really helped me see all the common issues that other students were facing, and that I was not really alone. It helped me to not internalize how, when things were going wrong, that it must have been me, when there were issues with my advisor, that it was something with me and I couldn't do it. So I think that's something I would definitely recommend for a lot of the universities that I've looked into. Usually there's no limit on the group counseling, but it's a regulated, it's like a class kind of where you have to go every week, so you can't drop in and out. And they do that just so that you're not disrupting the flow of the group, so it's usually the same set of students there all the time. There are other things like couples therapy, or like phone call therapy, workshops, as I mentioned before. Georgia Tech has a few, like managing stress and perfectionism, so those are kind of just one-time things for maybe a few hours. And there's also seeing a psychiatrist, which could prescribe you medication, but maybe not if you don't need it. There's also things you can do at home, such as using certain apps on your phone right now. They're pretty readily available, so I know there's people who use medication tracking just to remind them to take their medication, because if you are taking one, missing a dose can have some serious consequences, which I learned the hard way about a month ago and really regret. But there's also mood tracking to just see, like, how am I feeling? Am I starting to dip into a low right now? And if I do, if I seem like I am, maybe there's something I can do to prevent that, or just take care of it before it happens. There's sleep tracking and exercise and meal tracking as well, just to make sure, am I eating okay? It's okay to not eat healthy every single day, every single meal, but if you start to see a trend, that might be a problem. I think for me, online communities have been really important. So what I want to highlight is the Reveal to Heal, a mental health series for women of color in STEM. And I think that's particularly important because not only are women a minority in the fields, but women of color especially are. So this is a nice little community where they talk about mental health for different for students and for faculty that are women of color. I think there's a bunch of articles and videos. The Mighty is a online blog that talks about different mental health issues, chronically academic, specifically, it's like The Mighty, but specifically for academia, but also other sorts of social media services, whether they're groups on Facebook or Twitter or Tumblr or whatever. If you find people that, you know, you have this little anonymous aspect to it since you're not in person, but you can still talk about some issues and find people that relate to you. And I found that really useful. And some people even get emotional support animals. I don't have an official emotional support animal, but I have 2 cats, and they're very helpful when I'm not feeling so great. So I'm almost done. I've asked a few people that I know on Twitter, where I follow a lot of academics and people in physics and other STEM fields. What did you wish you knew as an undergrad? This was specifically undergrad, but I think they hold true for graduate school as well, about mental health. So one person said, I wish people told you that not going into academia or not carrying on with physics is not failing. Success is what you make of it. It can only be measured by you and your personal happiness. I wish I had recognized earlier that it's okay to ask for help, and it's not wrong to utilize mental health care. I also wish I took more advantage of my parents' health care. So we talked a little bit about health care before. It's obviously different in the US and in Spain, and I don't know the specifics, but that is a concern that comes up, especially with mental health. And also, I wish I knew that mental and emotional health should always come first, and then your career. You can only work so hard if you're not feeling well yourself. And just remember that working hard is important, but feeling good is important too. And then I have some resources. So I didn't think to print these out, but we have a copy of the slides. So I know some of you are taking pictures. You can take a picture now. So here's one resource. Yeah. So I wasn't thinking ahead enough. That phone number at the top is the U.S. National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, but there's also a particular one for Spain. And these are also some articles about mental health in academia in different areas. Some of them were mentioned before, like the Nature paper, but there's just a bunch of talking about it. The most recent one I found is from a physics professor that's in Physics World that just came out in March, called My Invisible Battle, which is anonymous, but talks in depth about their being a physicist with, I think it was bipolar disorder. So I'm happy to take any questions, or if we're doing discussion, or I don't know.
I was wondering how underestimated can be those statistics, because I guess those statistics reflect people who look for help, but there are a lot of people who maybe they don't have time for looking for help, or maybe they don't think that they need help. And I wonder the problem might be bigger than it is really reflected by the statistics. Can you comment on that?
Yeah, I think that could be true. I don't know. As a physicist, I haven't studied it too much, but I do know from articles that I've read that certain communities are more likely to access mental health care than other communities, particularly in the U.S. African Americans, just because of their culture, will not access health care. So I noticed one thing was that the numbers for African Americans for this one was quite low. or we're lower than you have white people, black and Hispanic, but knowing that as part of their community, they don't talk about mental health, they kind of more keep it inside the community. I think that might be underreported, as you said, but I don't know specifics. I don't know if you can.
Yes, maybe the interest of the Belgium study is that there are not people that are searching for help. There are normal PhD students, and they just respond a questionnaire, a self-report. So we are not looking for something special, and we found that results. Maybe it's a reality. We can know everybody who needs help, but maybe with this we can approach to them. Yes.
From your data, from the data you show, it comes out that being a PhD student is stressful. I would like to understand how this compares with other segments in the job market that are also stressful. I don't know, for example, professional sportsmen, or for example, the first year when working in a private company, you don't have a permanent contract and you are under scrutiny or things like that. So how PhD compares with those situations that may be similar?
And also postdocs, for instance,
Yeah.
which I mean, that also mean for some comparison.
Yes. This study doesn't compare with other areas. It just compares in the same level of educational level. People who is making his doctoral thesis and people who has made it. And the only difference between the three groups I mentioned is the fact of making the doctoral thesis in that moment. And with that groups, three control groups, they found the people who were making the PhD were more stressed or felt worse. But we can't consider the results to compare with other areas. But we suppose we could make PhD students with workers in any stressful area.
Yeah, I think for this study in Belgium, that's the one where they compare educational level as a PhD student and non-PhD student, and they found it still to be higher, equal education level for the PhD students. Of course, that we're still talking about, this is one country here, and even this second study, which doesn't compare educational level, it just compares PhD students in general. This is only 2,300 graduate students from 26 countries, 234 institutions. So there's a big difference country to country depending on what's available and what the stigma is like, and also services that are available on different campuses. So I think it's kind of hard to break it down at this point just because there's such few results. There's not a lot of data out yet, but they're starting to collect it. So I think in the future we could make a bigger statement.
So in the meantime, the message is that the sooner you finish your PhD, the better, right?
Yes,
So
maybe.
with no stress.
Not more stress because after that we have the unemployment problem.
Yeah.
Here in Spain especially.
Yeah, correlation doesn't imply causation. How do you know that research is not attracting people who are prone to mental health issues?
I think that is brought up in the paper. That is a possibility. I don't know enough and haven't conducted these studies myself, but I think that is a good question. And if that is the case, I would ask, what is it about academia that is attracting people with poor mental health? But that would be something else to deal with if that is the case.
That's interesting.
So I have observed in my environment that the PhD students that with problems of anxiety and depression, I'm surprised because it's just at the end when they have passed successfully all the challenges of the PhD period, and just while they have to write the manuscript, at the end they are completely blocked and depressed. And I was wondering if it is related to the fact that this is the moment where they have to make the life decisions of continuing in academia or not, to go for a postdoc many years abroad or not. Have you studied this? Is there a study of at which moment they do have these depressions or anxieties?
I haven't studied anything like that in particular, but I know with my own experience, I did something a little weird when I was at the end of my undergraduate career. I was double major in physics and math, but most of my energy was spent in physics research and in our physics community. But when it was time to apply for graduate schools, I dropped all that and applied for math graduate schools. And in hindsight, I think it was because of fear of failing at physics, because that was what I put all my time and energy into. And if I failed, that would say a lot more about myself, whereas something that I didn't work so hard on, if I tried it, at least I could say, well, I didn't work as hard as as I could have, so me not getting into a math PhD program or me not getting the PhD in the end was not because of myself. So I think that there is, this light decision what to do after PhD, but also the stress of, was all this work and time worth it? What happens if I don't pass? What happens if I don't get that job? And that just kind of adds up and accumulates at the very end. But that's just kind of my thoughts and experience. I don't know if you have anything to add.
Sorry, but if you apologize. I would like to explain you something, but in Spanish, because in English I don't have enough skills. Habitualmente, cuando hay un problema de ansiedad o de depresión, al principio lo podemos llevar, y hay mucha gente, y es lo que hemos visto en el estudio de Bélgica, que teniendo síntomas, ¿no? Más de 2 síntomas o más de 4 síntomas que ya pueden indicar que realmente hay un diagnóstico de trastorno depresivo, de trastorno de ansiedad, podemos continuar funcionando con un mayor gasto de energía, pero prácticamente rindiendo a nivel de trabajo bien, dejando de lado, perdiendo interés por otras áreas como la familiar, como nuestro tiempo de ocio, como el tiempo, ¿no? Las relaciones sociales. Pero llega un momento en que mantener ese funcionamiento va agotando la energía, sobre todo a nivel emocional. Y llega un punto donde eso hace como explosión, llega a un punto tal de tensión que es como una olla y de repente ¡pum!, se va toda la energía que teníamos. Ese estrés que al principio ha resultado adaptativo para poder llegar a todo, al final lo que hace es quitarnos la energía, y en ese momento, al final de todo, es cuando se llama una claudicación por estrés. Es que ya hemos llegado, ya lo hemos hecho, ya está todo.
A lo mejor está al final ya, cuando ya te relajas es
cuando ya no queda más energía. Y es en ese punto donde mucha gente se da cuenta que ha estado sufriendo con un trastorno de ansiedad o de depresión, pero el mismo nivel de autoexigencia que conlleva el trabajo, ¿no?, de una tesis, también nos lleva a ignorar nuestros propios síntomas porque hay que seguir, ¿no? The work is more important, my life is not important, so I have to continue working. That's the problem.
And also I have to say that during a PhD, the students can have situations, family situations. For instance, one of my doctoral students, she has a cancer, she has a sister with cancer during the PhD. So I mean, they can have many situations in life in which I think the depression can be natural and can be accepted. I mean, we cannot be all the time at 100% level enthusiastic about work. I mean, there are situations that are natural. You must allow yourself to be depressed, you lose your mother, you have a sister with cancer.
I want to also to listen PhD students. Huh?
I just want to do a couple of remarks. Depression is always acceptable. I mean, depression is never unacceptable. I mean, it's something that happens. So sometimes you might feel it like more natural or something like that, but it's something that happens and you need to do something to make it better. So the second thing is a doctorate is a very complex phase of life, and in my personal experience, a lot of different things happen during the doctorate that like make their summit in the last years. No? I mean, you begin not knowing what research is, you begin to know what research is, some things you like, some other things you don't like so much, and in the final years when you are faced with many decisions and all those things that you have not liked during the PhD, maybe you feel like the things that you didn't like are like a very big mountain. Something like that. So that's another, it's not just what you said, which is totally correct, that maybe the symptoms were there and you didn't notice them, or you
ignored them?
Yeah, but also that many things accumulate during the doctorate and they culminate in the last year. So at least in my case, it was like that. No?
There are also extra situations where I think that it is completely natural to be depressed, and otherwise we will not be here.
Yeah, but they are general, I mean, they come...
Yeah, but at least it's a long period and you can have this extra.
Yes, maybe remember that depression is another illness like other illness. It's a disease and it has a treatment, and it's like having a the flu, like having a flu, or as we broke our leg. No, we have something in depression. The difference is in our head, or in our mood, or in our way to see the life. But it's always the same. We have to do something to be better, and it's not a problem to be thermal. It's not a problem to be sick. Yes, thank you.
This is what I want to hear. You complain about your supervisor and what it is to do, and we are here to learn.
Almost the same.
I just have a general question. How is mental health care, therapy, those kind of things organized in Spain? Is it covered by Social Security? How to access it?
Yo creo que la parte más importante de la salud mental pasa por la salud, por el sistema público. Es decir, en todas las comunidades en España funciona igual. Dentro del Servicio Nacional de Salud está la salud mental. Lo que cambia en cada comunidad es cómo se utilizan esos recursos, porque salud mental conlleva muchas cosas y podría hacer mucho más de donde se llega. Porque la salud mental empieza en enfermería especializada. Hay enfermeras que se forman durante 2 años después de su carrera para ayudar en salud mental, y son las encargadas del counseling, de los grupos de relajación y de otros grupos de autocuidados que son importantes. Pasa sobre todo por los trabajadores sociales, que quizás en nuestro sistema están muy pobremente representados, pero hacen una gran labor con respecto a analizar nuestras redes de apoyo de pares, familiares o incluso en las redes laborales. Y luego están los psicólogos, que es la gran lucha que tenemos, por poner un ejemplo aquí en la Comunidad Valenciana. Por ley deberíamos tener psicólogos en nuestros centros de atención primaria, es decir, que yo puedo coger cita con mi médico de cabecera y si ve que es un problema relacionado con el estrés, tendría que poder remitirme a un psicólogo para hacer una intervención centrada en el estrés. Y pueden ser cosas simples como lo que os decía del mindfulness, que es el aprender a, como ponía en la diapositiva de Lao Tzu, volver al presente. ¿No? Simplemente aprender a hacer una relajación, aprender a focalizar mi atención en la respiración, son herramientas potentes. O saber qué es la ansiedad para poder manejarla, porque si no, cada vez que tengo un ataque de pánico voy a estar sin tener con qué defenderme, ¿no? Me deja muy desprotegido. Y todos esos recursos intermedios nos están faltando. Entonces, el médico de cabecera ve a alguien que tiene problemas de estrés, si es poco, pues mira, lo puedes manejar, si me parece más, te derivo al psiquiatra, y entonces nosotros somos los únicos que estamos recibiendo una gran masa de gente, que hay personas que tienen problemas leves de estrés y que la gran pena es que se quedan sin atender, o están infradiagnosticados, o al final se acaban matando moscas a cañonazos, porque para evitar que sigan habiendo ataques de pánico tenemos que medicar, porque no tenemos esos otros recursos. Yo trabajo en la Comunidad Valenciana y he trabajado en diferentes zonas, y ahora donde estoy sí que tenemos una enfermera que hace grupos de relajación y me evita tener que poner en ocasiones tratamiento, porque las personas después de un taller de relajación aprenden a manejar un ataque de pánico y no necesitan ninguna medicación más. O un taller de resolución de problemas, que es tener herramientas, ¿no?, cuando una situación nos supera, para poder responder si en ese momento concreto no podemos. Entonces, ¿cómo está organizado? Pues todo pasa por el Sistema Nacional de Salud, aunque la mayor parte del trabajo, de la carga, la llevan en este momento los psiquiatras, porque estamos en España al revés. Somos 2 psiquiatras por cada psicólogo, con lo cual los psicólogos es como un recurso muy escaso y están destinados a grupos muy específicos de duelo o incluso de mindfulness. Y luego está lo que no pasa por el sistema de salud y donde quizás hay una gran diferencia, y es la persona que con un seguro privado puede acceder directamente, dice, bueno, tengo este problema, me voy al psicólogo directamente, tiene una gran ventaja. No tiene listas de espera, no tiene nada, le autoriza su seguro 12 sesiones, que es lo habitual en una terapia, la CBT, la cognitivo-conductual, que es muy resolutiva para un problema concreto, no es una terapia de por vida para esto, y tienes tus sesiones y empiezas, acabas y te has beneficiado, y eso en la sanidad pública no lo podemos ofrecer. Y realmente ahí es donde se marca la diferencia de, ¿no?, las 2 velocidades que hacen que una persona con más recursos económicos pueda acceder enseguida al tratamiento recomendado por todas las guías clínicas, y lo que se puede hacer cuando no tenemos recursos y funcionamos como, pues, aprovechando los recursos de la mejor manera posible.
And how does the system cope with foreign people that cannot speak Spanish fluently? Because in particular, I mean, I can imagine that, I mean, for these kind of things, I mean, to describe your illness, I mean, is can be tricky, and in particular, I mean, it can be very personal.
Yes.
So, I mean, is there a system of people to help?
We can call the traductors, the translator for people that are not speaking Spanish, and to translate so they speak. We are in the consult with the patient and the traductor.
Because I can imagine there is a kind of case that is also common in this environment. I mean, we have many people from countries, and they don't have the time to manage well the language.
I think that it is not so comfortable when you are, if you are just with the doctor, it is probably much better than if you are from another person, a third person there.
Yes, maybe in many cases, people who doesn't speak Spanish come to our consults with a family and to tell us what's happening.
But I can imagine also in this case, I mean, very often when people coming from abroad, I mean, are not with their families. I mean, are just more or less alone.
Alone, yes.
But
And they are
so the message is that, I mean, the system actually, I mean, foresees that, I mean, there is, you know, I mean, people to help, I mean, these patients and to interact with the doctors, right?
Yes.
This, I think, is important for them to know.
Yes, yes.
More questions? Feedback?
I just want to say one more thing. So recently I started a Google group for physicists with mental health issues to just discuss problems that come up and share literature, things like that. So I know some topics that come up were about like talking to your advisor about issues or how to give talks and things like that when you have anxiety. Right now there's no good way of joining the group since it's a private group just to control who's accessing it and not. But if you email me, I can add you. Just let me know that you want to be added. There's about 50 people in there right now, a mix of undergraduates, graduates, faculty, and even some people who are not in academia but have a science degree, particularly physics, but were in academia at some point. And I think it's a mix of, it's not just US, I think it's mostly US, but since this is from some international conferences, there's some people in there from France and maybe Spain, I don't know exactly, but so just let me know if you want to be added, send me an email at any point and I can add you.
Okay, so thank you very much for all of you.